The day was gray and windy. The sun was struggling to break through the clouds, but Tyrion could no more have said who was going to win that fight, that the one of which his life depended. It looked as though 1,000 people had come to see if he would live or die. They lined the castle wall walks and elbowed one another on the steps of keeps and towers. They watched from the stable doors, from windows and bridges, from balconies and roofs. And the yard was packed with them, so many of that the gold cloaks and the knights of the King's Guard had to shut them back to make enough room for the fight. Some had dragged out the chairs to watch more comfortably, while others perched on barrels. We should have done this in the dragon pit, Tyrion thought sourly. We could have charged a penny a head and paid for Joffrey's wedding and funeral both. Some of the onlookers even had small children sitting on their shoulders to get a better view. They shouted and pointed at the sight of Tyrion. Cersei seemed to have a child herself beside Sir Gregor. In his armor, the mountain looked bigger than any man had the right to be. Beneath a long yellow surcoat, bearing the 3 black dogs of Clegane, he wore a heavy plate over chain mail, dull gray steel dented and scarred in battle. Beneath that would be boiled leather and a layering of quilting. A flat-top great helm was bolted to his gorget, with breadths around the mouth and nose, and a narrow slit for vision. The crest atop it was a stone fist. If Sir Gregor was suffering from wounds, Tyrion could not see no sign of it from across the yard. He looked as though he was chiseled out of rock, standing there. His great sword was planted in the ground before him, 6 feet of scarred metal. Sir Gregor's huge hands, clad in gauntlets and lobster steel, clasped across hilt to either side of the grip. Even Prince Oberyn Paramore paled at the sight of him. "You are going to fight that?" Elia said in a hushed voice. "I am going to kill that," her lover replied carelessly. Tyrion had his own doubts now that they stood on the brink. When he looked at Prince Oberyn, he found himself wishing that he had Bronn defending him, or even better, Jaime. The Red Viper was lightly armored. Greaves, vambrace, gorgets, spalder, steel codpiece. Elsewise, Oberyn was clad in supple leather and flowing silk. Over his brynie, he wore scales of gleaming copper, but mail and scale together would not give him a quarter of the protection of Gregor's heavy plate. With his visor removed, the prince's helm was effectively no better than a half-helm, lacking even a nasal. His round steel shield was brightly polished and showed the sun and spear in red gold, yellow gold, white gold, and copper. Dance around him until he's so tired he can hardly lift his arm, then pull and put him on his back. The Red Viper seemed to have the same notion as Bronn, but the sellsword had been blunt about the risk of such tactics. "I hope to 7 hells that you know what you are doing, Snake." A platform had been erected beside the Tower of the Hand, halfway between the 2 champions. That was where Lord Tywin sat with his brother Sir Kevan. King Tommen was not in evidence for that. At least Tyrion was grateful. Lord Tywin glanced briefly at his dwarf son. Then he lifted his hand. A dozen trumpeters blew a fanfare to quiet the crowd. The High Septon shuffled forward in his tall crystal crown and prayed that the Father above would help them in this judgment, and the warrior would lend his strength to the arm of the man whose cause was just. "That would be me," Tyrion almost shouted, but they would only laugh, and he was sick unto death of laughter. Sir Osmond Kettleblack brought Clegane his shield, a massive thing of heavy oak, written in black iron. As the mountain slid his left arm through the straps, Tyrion saw the hounds of Clegane have been painted over. This morning, Sir Gregor bore the 7-point star of the Andals had brought to Westeros when they crossed the narrow sea to overwhelm the first men and their gods. Very pious of you, Cersei, but I doubt the gods will be impressed. There were only 50 yards between them. Prince Oberyn advanced quickly. Sir Gregor more ominously. The ground does not shake when he walks, Tyrion told himself. That's only my heart fluttering. When the two men were 10 yards apart, the Red Viper stopped and called out, "Have they told you who I am?" Sir Gregor grunted through his breaths. "Some dead man." He came on, inexorable. The Dorishman slid sideways. "I am Oberyn Martell, a Prince of Dorne," he said, as the mountain turned to keep him in sight. "Princess Elia was my sister." "Who?" Sir asked Gregor Clegane. Oberyn Law's spear jabbed, but Sir Gregor took the point of his shield, shoved it aside, and bowled back at the prince, his great sword flashing. The Dorishman spun around, untouched. The spear darted forward. Clegane slashed at it. Martell snapped it back, then thrust again. Metal screamed on metal as the spearhead slid off the mountain's chest, slicing through the surcoat, leaving a long bright scratch on steel beneath. "Elia Martell, Princess of Dorne," the Red Viper hissed. "You raped her. You murdered her. You killed her children." Sir Gregor grunted. He made a ponderous charge to hack at the Dorishman's head. Prince Oberyn avoided him easily. "You raped her. You murdered her. You killed her children. Did you come to talk or to fight?" "I came to hear you confess." The Red Viper landed a quick thrust on the mountain's belly to no effect. Gregor cut at him and missed. The long spear lanced above his sword like a serpent's tongue. It flickered in and out, feinting low and landing high, jabbing at groin, shield, eyes. The mountain makes for a big target, at least, Tyrion thought. The Prince Oberyn could scarcely miss, though none of his blows were penetrating. Sir Gregor's heavy plate. The Dorishman kept circling, jabbing, then darting back again, forcing the bigger man to turn and turn again. Clegane is losing sight of him. The mountain's helm had a narrow eye slit, severely limiting his vision. Oberyn was making good use of that, and the length of his spear and his quickness. It went on that way what seemed a long time. Back and forth they moved across the yard, round and round in spirals. Sir Gregor slashing at air while Oberyn's spear struck at arm and leg and thrice at his temple. Gregor's big wooden shield took its share of its hits as well until the dog's head peeped out, came under the stars, and elsewhere the raw oak showed through. Clegane would grunt from time to time, and once Tyrion heard him mutter a curse, but otherwise he fought in sullen silence. Not Oberyn Martell. "You raped her," he called, fading. "You murdered her," he said, dodging a looping cut from Gregor's great sword. "You killed her children," he shouted, slamming the spear point into the giant's throat, only to have it glance off the thick steel gorget with a screech. "Oberyn is toying with him," said Elia Sand. "That's fool's play," thought Tyrion. "The mountain is too bloody big to be any man's toy." All around the yard, the throng of spectators was creeping in towards the two combatants, edging forward inch by inch to get a better view. The King's Guard tried to keep them back, shoving at the gawkers forcibly with their big white shields, but there was hundreds of gawkers, and only 6 of them of the men in white armor. "You raped her!" Prince Oberyn parried a savage cut with his spearhead. "You murdered her!" He sent the spear point at Clegane's eyes so fast that the huge man flinched back. "You killed her children!" The spear flicked her sideways and down, scraping against the mountain's breastplate. "You raped her! You murdered her! You killed her children!" The spear was 2 feet longer than Sir Gregor's sword, more than enough to keep him at an awkward distance. He hacked at the shaft whenever Oberyn lunged at him, trying to lop off the spearhead, but he might as well have been trying to hack off the wings of a fly. "You raped her!" You murder her! You killed her children! Gregor tried a bull rush, but Oberyn skipped aside and circled around his back. You raped her! You murdered her! You killed her children! Be quiet! Sir Gregor seemed to be moving a little slower, and his great sword no longer rose quite so high as it had when the contest began. Shut your bloody mouth! You raped her, the prince said, moving to the right. Enough! The Sir Gregor took 2 long strides and brought his sword down at Oberyn's head, but the Dornishman backstepped once more. You murdered her, he said. Shut up! Gregor charged headlong at the point of the spear, which slammed into his right breast, then slid aside with a hideous steel shriek. Suddenly the mountain was close enough to strike, his huge sword flashing in a steel blur. The crowd was screaming as well. Oberyn slipped the first blow and let go of the spear, useless now that Sir Gregor was in his range. The second cut of the Dornishman caught on his shield. Metal met metal with an ear-splitting clang, sending the Red Viper reeling. Sir Gregor followed, bellowing. He doesn't use swords. He just roars like an animal. Tyrion thought. Oberyn's retreat became a headlong backwards flight, a mere inches ahead of the great sword as it slashed at his chest, his arm, his head. The stable was behind him. Spectators screamed and shoved at each other to get out the way. One stumbled onto Oberyn's back. Sir Gregor hacked down with all his savage strength. The Red Viper threw himself sideways, rolling. The luckless stable boy behind him was not so quick. As his arm rose to protect his face, Gregor's sword took it off between the elbow and shoulder. Shut up! The mountain Hyle at the stable's boy screamed, and this time he swung the blade sideways, sending the top half of the lad's head across the yard in a spray of blood and brains. Hundreds of spectators suddenly seemed to lose all interest in the guilt or innocence of Tyrion Lannister, judging by the way they pushed and shoved at each other to escape the yard. But the Red Viper of Dorne was back on his feet, his long spear in hand. Elia, he called at Sir Gregor. You raped her. You murdered her. You killed her children. Now say her name. The mountain whirled. Helm, shield, sword coat. He was spattered with gore from head to heels. You talk too much, he grumbled. You make my head hurt. I will hear you say it. She was Elia of Dorne. The mountain snorted contemptuously and came on. In that moment, the sun broke through the low clouds that hid in the sky since dawn. The son of Dorne, Tyrion told himself. But it was Gregor Clegane who moved force to put the sun at his back. This dim and brutal man, but he has a warrior's instincts. The Red Viper crouched, squinting, sending his spear darting forward again. Sir Gregor hacked at it, but the thrust had only been a feint, off balance. He stumbled forward a step. Prince Oberyn tilted his dented metal shield. A shaft of sunlight blazed blindingly off the polished gold and copper into the narrow slit of his foe's helm. Clegane lifted his own shield against the glare. Prince Oberyn's spear flashed like lightning and found the gap in the heavy plate, the joint under the arm. The point punched through the mail and boiled leather. Gregor gave a choked grunt as the Dornishman twisted his spear and yanked it free. Elia! Say it! Elia of Dorne! He was circling, his spear poised for another thrust. Say it! Tyrion had his own prayer. Fall down and die was how it went. Damn you! Fall down and die! The blood trickling from the mountain's armpit was his own now. He must be bleeding even more heavily inside the breastplate. When he tried to take a step, one knee buckled. Tyrion thought he was going down. Prince Oberyn had circled behind him, Elia of Dorne, he shouted. Sir Gregor started to turn, but too slow and too late. The spearhead went through the back of his knee this time, through the layers of chain and leather between the plates of the thigh and calf. The mountain reeled and swayed, then collapsed face first on the ground. His sword went flying from his hand. Slowly, ponderously, he rolled onto his back. The Dornisman flung away his ruined shield, grasped the spear in both hands, and sauntered away. Behind him, the mountain let out a groan and pushed himself onto an elbow. Oberyn whirled, quit, and ran at his falling foe. Elia! He screamed as he drove the spear down with the whole weight of his body behind it. The crack of his ashwood shaft snapping was almost a sweet sound as Cersei wail of fury, and for an instant Prince Oberyn had wings. The snake has vaulted over the mountain. 4 feet of broken spear jutted from Clegane's belly as Prince Oberyn rose and dusted himself off. He tossed aside the splintered shield and claimed his foe's great sword. If you die before you say her name, sir, I will hunt you through all 7 hells, he promised. Sir Gregor tried to rise. The broken spear had gone through him and was pinning him to the ground. He wrapped both hands about the shaft, grunting, but could not pull it out. Beneath him was a spreading pool of red. I'm feeling more innocent by the instant, Tyrion told Elia Sand beside him. Prince Oberyn moved closer. Say the name. He put a foot on the mountain's chest and raised the great sword with both hands. Whether he intended to hack off Gregor's head or shove the point through the eye slit was something Tyrion would never know. Clegane's hand shot up and grabbed the Dornisman behind the knee. The Red Viper brought down the great sword in a wild slash, but he was off balance, and the edge did not no more than put another dent in the mountain's vambrace. Then the sword was forgotten as Gregor's hand tightened and twisted, yanking the Dornisman down on the top of him. They wrestled in the dust and blood, the broken spear wobbling back and forth. Tyrion saw with horror that the mountain wrapped one huge arm around the prince, drawing him tight against his chest like a lover. Elia of Dorne. They all heard Sir Gregor said. When they came close enough to kiss, his deep voice boomed within the hell. I killed her! The screaming whelp. His thrust, his free hand to Oberyn's unprotected face, pushing his steel finger into his eyes. Then I raped her! Clegane slammed his fist into the Dornisman's mouth, making splinters of his teeth. Then I smashed her fucking head like this! As he drew back his huge fist, the blood on his gauntlet seemed to smoke in the cold dawn air. There was a sickening crunch. Elia Sand wailed in terror, and Tyrion breakfast came bowling back up. He found himself on his knees, retching bacon and sausages and apple cakes, and that double helping of fried eggs and cooked up with onions and fiery Dornish peppers. He never heard his father speak the words that condemned him. Perhaps no words was necessary. I put my life in the Red Viper's hands, and he dropped it. When he remembered too late that snakes had no hands, Tyrion began to laugh hysterically. He was halfway down the serpentine steps before he realized that the gold clothes were not taking him back to his Tower of Rome. I've been consigned to the Black Cells, he said. They did not bother to answer. Why waste your breath on the dead?